Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Navigating Career Pivot Points, Leading Through Change in the Design and Build Industry. As we continue our theme of smart home technology for the month of November, I want to thank Duravit for generously sponsoring this month's Design and Business webinar series. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Brittany Niche, founder of What You Do Matters. Brittany, please take it away.
Hello, everyone. I am so happy to be here to talk about our pivot paths and all the different changes of those career inflection points that we have that we're all navigating. With my lovely introduction, you heard my name is Brittany Nish. I am the founder of my own boutique career and leadership development company called What You Do Matters. And I love to help leaders really navigate what I call the messy middle. And I feel this little illustration does a great job of describing what that messy middle feels like. I'm sure many of you could relate here, but it's really that space between ambition, but then also burnout, performance, but also purpose. So I get really excited to arm leaders and professionals like all of you with some really tangible information that will help you go back to your roles, your industry, and really feel like you can bring your best self forward as you're growing new skills and as you're navigating all of the things that you all have to navigate. A little bit quick background about my experience. So it is so exciting to be here because I actually spent 7 years of my career in the kitchen and bath industry space when I worked for Fortune Brands Innovations. So I was the director of paid media, so running all of the advertising efforts for brands like Moen and House of Roll. And so it feels a little bit like a homecoming to be here. Really fun though. I took all of that marketing experience, went back to school, and then applied all of that to leadership and team development, which is how in the world I've gotten here today. And I feel so very lucky because I've been able to work with amazing professionals like all of you and an amazing, amazing list of brands like you can see on here. But most importantly, I want to talk about really the moose on the table. And if none of you have heard of the moose on the table, so actually, while I was at Fortune Brands, I had a fantastic boss who came from a French background. And the French do not say elephant in the room, they actually say moose on the table, which I now love to affectionately use. And the moose on the table is really all of the change that we have been going through in the last couple of years. So I would love for you to put a little emoji in the chat and say, if you have felt like you've been through a lot of work changes in the past year, what emoji best represents that? Because I know with all the organizations and professionals that I have been working with, there's a lot going on, which is probably like a little bit of an understatement, right? Right. And with all that change, how has it made you feel? Are you in the camp over here? You're like that emoji with the sunglasses. You're like, I'm cruising. It's cool. I'm along for the ride. Or are you kind of over here? I really love the melting emoji. I feel like with all the things going on, there are many times when I'm like, oh my gosh, another change, another thing for us to be experiencing. Yeah, I could see some of those emojis happening there. But the truth of all of this, and really, like I said, that moose on the table, is that change is so hard. And anybody in your professional life or in your personal life that tries to tell you otherwise is probably fibbing with you a little bit. I'd like to say they're probably lying a little bit because change is immensely hard for all of us as humans. There's not a single one of us that gets to say, oh, change is easy and I love it just because of the way we're made up. It is so hard for us to embrace change. And so I put some of this information on here because I'm a little bit of a nerd. I love to give all that data in detail for us to wrap our minds around. But as humans, our brains are wired for routines. And so any type of disruption that we have with those routines, what do we think happens? It equals stress. And that stress makes us want to resist change, that very thing that we're supposed to be getting on board with, especially from a professional standpoint, right? Things are constantly changing in our organizations and in our industry that we want to be able to navigate that and move forward and innovate. But because of the stress of it all, we tend to resist it even when it is positive. And the reason being for all of this is because there's a lot of neuroscience related to it. And so I want to give you kind of like a peek behind the hood or a peek into the brain of what that looks like. And the truth is that when we experience that uncertainty or that change or that newness or innovation, whatever word we want to put on it, our amygdala, which is a part of our brain, starts to light up and we get that fear response or that threat response that immediately puts us into fight or flight. So all we can think about when that happens is how do we survive, just truly on that biological level. And so while all that is happening in our minds, our prefrontal cortex, which is that part of our brain responsible for all the things that we want to be doing as professionals, critical thinking, rational thought, problem solving, it all ends up going offline because that prefrontal cortex and that amygdala, they can't be operating at the same time. And so when all that critical thinking goes offline, that is the exact opposite of what we actually want. And it's why that when any type of change is happening, even the tiniest of things, like that Teams ping or somebody trying to get a hold of you over Slack, can start to feel really, really overwhelming because our thinking capacity is literally shrinking in the moment. And I know some of you are head nodding here. You're like, yup, I am feeling all of those things, Brittany. And honestly, a lot of this is heightened right now because of the environment that we're living in. I read a very interesting report earlier this week that talked about if we go back to the 1930s and we look at the pace of change, we were only experiencing a significant amount of change. It was like once every 6 years. Now, the pace that we are experiencing significant change is literally once every 6 weeks. And significant change means that we have to do things completely differently. We're having to scrap a lot of things, innovate new things. And so the reason for all of that is what researchers call VUCA, meaning we are living in a world where things are volatile. So that velocity of change is increasing and increasing and increasing. Things are massively uncertain, right? A lack of predictability and reliable data that we can lean on. They're massively complex, meaning there are so many variables for us to consider, and they're a heck of a lot ambiguous. So there's not real clear precedents or clear expectations or clear rules of how we navigate all of this. And so it probably sounds really familiar, like, yes, these are all the things, Brittany, but how in the world do we get through it and still be able to show up as the professionals that we want to be and make an impact that we want to make? And I know all of you, being in the industry that you are, you rely heavily on creativity. Creativity is one of the foundational pieces of what you do. But to be creative, we have to be able to get past that stress point so that we're able to actually bring those creative ideas forward and not feel like we're absolutely drowning in them. Because I will tell you, we're going to be just a little bit more of a sad, a little bit more of a downer here before we get into how we actually create change. We are making a ton of decisions faster without all of the data inside our organizations that have countless moving parts. And the research is showing, the facts are showing that we're really not doing a good job of it because we are having some pretty serious outcomes. And so I wanted to share with you some of those outcomes that we are seeing from a factual perspective when it comes to the state of change that we are seeing at work. And one is the amount of overwhelm that we are all feeling by all of this constant change that is happening. And you can see the stat on here that 71%, so we're not even at that halfway mark, we are well above that halfway mark. 71% of employees are reporting feeling so overwhelmed by the amount of change that they are experiencing on a daily basis in their professional lives. And because of that, 32% of them feel like their productivity is actually being massively impacted as a result of it. Additionally, what do we think? We've already brought this forward. All of this uncertainty and all of this change and overwhelm is fueling inside each and every single one of us. And that is that over half of us at 54% are having massive, massive, massive stress, significantly increasing year over year because of how this change is picking up. We're being tasked all the time. How do we incorporate AI in our work? How do we upskill? How do we do new things? How do we stay on top of how fast everything is moving? And how do we still stay competitive in that process? Which is resulting and a lot of stress. And what does all this stress lead to? All this stress is leading to some pretty serious outcomes like the average tenure of a person shrinking across industries. So, before people would be staying in roles, and let's talk about mid career professionals, early in career professionals, their tenure is usually about 3 years in a given role. If you look at that mid career professional, so anybody over 5 years of experience, they're typically spending about 6 years within a role, 6 years plus. All of that has been cut in half because of all of this stress. So that tenure is shrinking because people are reevaluating when all this change is happening. It makes people say, all right, well, if there's all this uncertainty, I might as well add a little bit more uncertainty in the mix and ask myself, are these the things that I want to be doing? Is this the way that I want to show up professionally? And am I still on the path that I want to be on? And so, as you can see, the other outcome of all of this change is that more professionals, and maybe some of you that are here now are thinking about this in the back of your mind, are rethinking your career path, are rethinking what your role looks like in the next 3 to 5 years more than you ever have before. And so this is where we start to ask ourselves, if all of this is going on, if we are just swirling in all of this change, and not only are we asking ourselves, how do we continue to innovate and be effective in our roles, but also, how do I really make sure that I'm on the right career path? What does it look like? How do we navigate that? How do we get off the roller coaster? I love this picture so much because I feel like this is how many of us are just really feeling right now. We're like holding on for dear life on the coaster, like, oh my gosh, professionally, what is happening? And so, my answer to all of that today, and really the central topic that we're going to be digging into, is really making sure that we take a pause. And so, I love to play on words. We know I have that background in marketing and media. And so, I love to come up with little phrases. And so, for the sake of today, I want you to think about it as your pivot pause. And your pivot pause is all about giving yourself a moment to take stock of where you are right now so that you can move forward through all of this change, all of this uncertainty with a little bit more clarity and confidence about where you want to go and what tangible actions that you could take to move forward. But to do all of that, you first have to understand, what pivot point are you actually at? And so today we're going to dig into what exactly are pivot points. How do you start to sense make so you know which pivot point that you're at specifically? And then we're going to talk about the 4 common pivot points from a professional standpoint that I see most people really evaluating and being at in this moment of time with all of this change and uncertainty. So, to kick us off, let's really dig into what in the world are pivot points. And so, pivot points are these key stages. And so, through all of the different organizations, individuals, work I did in my master's program to identify what is happening with all these stages in a person's professional life and even in their leadership journey as well, there have come up 10 key stages that every single professional goes through, if not once, but multiple times throughout the journey of their life, career, and leadership. And they are these moments that ask us to reflect on where we're at. They represent those times when we're like, I need to make a decision about where I'm going next. I'm being called to do something different or to change something about my career path, and I need to figure out what exactly that change is. And so they're not just moments of challenge, because I will tell you, I've had a lot of conversations with professionals that go, oh, well, it's really when something happens, like I get laid off, or a reorg happens, or new leaders step in, and now I'm reporting to somebody different who I have to learn their whole style again. And yes, some of them are those moments that might be challenging, but they're not just those moments. They're really about all the opportunities that we have to show up more intentionally, more confidently, and with a lot more clarity about the impact that we can make day in and day out professionally. And so I love talking about this because when we're able to recognize the pivot point that we're currently facing, it empowers us immensely because we get very, very clear on how we should be spending our time, where we can create that biggest impact in our roles and even within our industry, and how do we start making those super purposeful decisions about what it looks like to move forward through our actions. And so you'll see that I'll give you some very clear examples of what that looks like, and also give you some pop culture examples too, because I love throwing out like the theory books. I know we all love stats and facts, but I also think it's really powerful to see examples from our favorite books, our favorite movies, our favorite shows, those things that feel a lot more relatable. But first, let's talk about how do you know if you are at some type of pivot point? So, this moment where you know like that you have to figure out what's next, but you're not quite sure what that next might be. And so, I put here a couple sense making things for you to help you triangulate. Am I actually at a pivot point, or am I just rethinking my entire life because of all of the change that's happening right now? So, number one signal that tells you that you're at a pivot point is you have that sense of anticipation or renewed focus. So, you're clear that a shift is happening and you're really ready to lean into it. I'm sure many of you on here, again, I know I talked about with your industry how creative all of you are. And really, there's so much going on that's changing in all industries, but also in your industry as well. Smart technology, integrating all of that. How do you still have the aesthetics, the idea that's always changing as well? I know there's so many nuances and factors that are happening there. But one signal of being at a pivot point is that you're really excited about maybe one of those things or something in that vein. And you might be asking yourself, do I want to lean more into that? And what would that look like for me to do that? So that type of incitement and anticipation is super powerful. Number two, conversely, on the other end, is that you're feeling like your role that you're currently in is no longer in alignment with your particular strengths or values. I see this happen a lot of times in mass change like we're experiencing because roles, they start shifting, different priorities, different expectations, which gives us this amazing opportunity to go, is that still in alignment with what I want to do? Or can I better be served in the way that I'm able to show up doing something different? And that is the great thing about industries and organizations. There's always different opportunities to tap into. And so being able to look at ourselves and go, I want to seek better alignment and leverage what I do best. And it might not be in my current role. I think is a really great self awareness tool and absolutely a signal that you're at a pivot point. The next one is about excitement for new opportunities and really that readiness to level up into that next thing. So you are super energized about something that is happening in your professional experience and you're eager to take it on as a new challenge. So it might not even be something that you would consider a strength, but it could be something that you are immensely interested in. I've had a lot of conversations with leaders right now, and that interest is AI. Everyone knows that AI taking the world by storm, and while some people you can really feel and see that hesitancy, others are really like, ooh, I'm very excited to level up in this area and immensely curious of what that could look like for me, my role, my department, and the organization that I'm part of. So I think that's very powerful. The next one here is life changes have reshaped your career priorities. We know we all go through different phases, stages, and seasons of life. And sometimes we have caregiving responsibilities. Sometimes we have different life circumstances that come into play or in the picture. And so these new demands that we're navigating, they require us to look at how our career and how our life is intertwined in new ways. And so this pivot point is all about reflecting on what do my evolving goals look like in this current season or this current phase of my life. A couple other signals here. You have an expanded vision for your career or team. I love this one so much. This is a great signal that you are at that pivot point to decide what's next here because you see that there is more. There's more opportunity, more things that you could dig into, and not just you, but also for your team as well. That always feels like an exciting pull into that pivot because you want to go in that direction where you're able to show up and lead with greater impact, greater influence, and more of a meaningful difference, no matter what it is that you're doing. And so if you're wondering, okay, Brittany, those are a lot of signals. What are those 10 pivot points that you kind of alluded to? These are the full 10 here. So you can see we all start out at the first one, which is entering into the working world. And then you could see the other ones on here as well. And I will tell you, there is no professional that I know that has gotten away from navigating any one of these pivot points. And as I mentioned many times, we go back and we oscillate between some of the other ones. I personally can tell you, I have had multiple instances of a career setback. I've had many path changes. There have been multiple times where I've gone back and got further education or wanted to bet on myself or reprioritize life and career based on what was going on in that season of my life. So many different things. And as a fun fact, if you're looking at all of my branding and all of the details here, a fun aside that I love to say is that I feel like so much professional development or leadership development is something that's on a blue background with blue PowerPoint slides. And I knew when I did this work, I wanted to do something very different. So everything is fantasy based, giving it a little bit of a magic and creativity and design so we don't feel so bored when we're looking at these things. So I know some of you are like, wow, what are all these illustrations? We got to have a little fun with it. But the importance here, to get back to our pivot points, is that the whole reason why we want to know that specific pivot point that we're at is because it gives you so much directional information about where you want to go in your career and what you want to work towards next professionally. And some of those things I put on here, whether it's clarity, so really being able to understand where you are and where you want to go when it comes to those professional goals of yours. Some other ones on here is I love the focus one, really being able to intentionally set those meaningful goals that align with your values and priorities right now. And then you can see purpose as one of the ones on here too. So defining what success looks like for you in particular in this season that you're navigating. So your pivot point gives you just so much great information that gives you that clarity. The one thing that always comes up with professionals is they're like, I just feel like a little bit murky of where I'm going and what I'm doing and where I fit into the picture of all the things. And your pivot point really does help become that compass for you to help guide and lead you in going forward. So we won't have time to get into all 10 of the pivot points today, but I did want to bring forward the 4 pivot points that are particularly relevant to all the professionals and leaders that I have been working with right now. They have just been coming up again and again. And so I wanted to focus in on these 4. And so the 4 that you could see here is one, we're going to talk about the path change, which is all about rethinking what fits for you in this moment. 2, we're going to talk about further education, which, surprise, all of you in here right now, you're doing further education, but we're going to talk about some more ways that you can lean into that further education. And that's all about learning so that you can stay relevant in your industry, in your field, and as the professional leader that all of you are. We're also going to talk about reprioritizing life, career, and leadership. And so this is where we talk about how do you redefine success on your own terms? And then lastly, we'll spend a couple minutes talking about betting on yourself. So building those things that don't yet exist. And this is really that creativity piece. So for all of you that love to lean into that creative side, you're especially going to love that focus. Just a little bit here of why we're focusing on these 4 out of the whole suite of 10 of them right now. One, I already told you because these are the ones that are surfacing most often and most frequent today. But I would also add that these are also the 4 that all of us feel really, really intensely or acutely because how rapidly that change is happening and how it's really shifting our work, our identity, and our different priorities that we have as well. They are the ones that are really triggered by those external disruptions. So technology, economy changes, organizational changes, they also reflect all those inner tensions that we're likely feeling because of those external disruptions. So I hear a lot of grappling right now of what people feel they must become, given the current state of change and the skills that are required, versus where they're actually at now, or more importantly, where they even want to become. And so it's that paradox of tension as well. And so these 4 pivot points in particular help us triangulate again in that way. And they often represent those spots where we often find pauses, questions, and even some of that resistance that gets in the way of that growth actually happening? So I just feel like they're very apropos right now to dig into. And then most importantly, they're all very actionable, very tangible things that you can use and take forward if one of these four are the pivot point that you personally are experiencing right now. So, my goal for you today is I want you to be able to walk away, one, being able to understand what pivot point accurately represents where you are currently at in your professional journey. Two, I want to give you some actionable tools and strategies that you can bring back into the real world of your professional experience. And then three, we're going to talk about why being in community with others and really leaning on the people around you, whether it's everyone here that is part of your industry, which is a really wonderful community, but then also your communities back at your workplaces. So, your peers, your colleagues, your cross functional team members, there's so much value in the people around you. And so, I do want to make sure that we end with a reminder of all of that. So, with that, let's get into these four. Number one, being the path change. And I feel all of these are like pretty self explanatory in the names, but the path change as a pivot point really represents you realizing that your current path isn't cutting it. And you're really sitting over there deciding, can that change that you potentially want to make or want to consider making, is it scary? Is it actually what you want? Or are you just chasing that excitement? And so you can see here, I put some of those signals that might give you that information that you're there. But I also want to talk about that support that's needed when you're at this pivot point of wanting to make some type of path change. And that mostly is encouragement from the people around you, who have made a similar change and have been able to go into different areas of their industry or within their organization. As I mentioned at the top, I love to give a pop culture reference so that we can really bring these to life through characters that many of us know and love and can relate to. And our first character here is Andy Sachs from The Devil Wears Prada. For those that don't know The Devil Wears Prada, it is truly an iconic movie. And they say what was once great is now great again because of all the nostalgia. And that is certainly true because now, years and years later after the original, they are making a two, Devil Wears Prada 2, which I personally am very interested to see how that is going to go. But in The Devil Wears Prada, we have Andy Sachs, who is our main character, our protagonist, and she gets a job that a million girls would die for, and it is in a magazine as the assistant to Miranda Priestley, who is the editor. She really represents the editor of Vogue, although that is not what they call it all in the show, but essentially she is supposed to represent the editor of Vogue. And quickly, Andy, who was an aspiring writer, gets swept away in the world of this fast paced, highly competitive environment. And she starts to increasingly feel misaligned with the work that she's having to do, the decisions that she's having to make. And you can see quickly that she's realizing that the success of her in that role comes at a pretty high cost, not only to her values, but also to the relationships at play as well. And so ultimately, she makes the decision to have a path change, and she chooses to leave behind the prestige, the contacts, the clothes of this role, and actually go and find true fulfillment instead. So we know that Andy is at this pivot point of a path change because she feels lost. She's questioning if the current path is the right fit. We see her grapple with that in the movie. Does she continue to do it? Does she continue to go against her values, lose relationships? Or does she make a harder decision to start from scratch again? Because the whole reason she had to take an assistant job was because she couldn't get a break in the industry any other way. And so she's also facing a lot of judgment from some of her peers and other industry people that she meets in her role, from walking away from that ideal opportunity or that role that a million girls would die for to have that opportunity. And so you see her go through all of this. And I tell you this story, and I tell you the story of all these characters, so you really get that sense of feeling what it would be like if you were to experience this particular pivot point. So I have some mini journaling prompts for you as we go through, and this is one of those mini journaling prompts. So I want you to take a couple minutes here, and I want you to just sit and think about what part of your current career path right now feels like it may no longer fit, and what is one small change that could bring it back into alignment. I will tell you, this is such a powerful question to ask because we don't have to throw everything out the window. A path change doesn't mean that you're just going to get up and go and completely do something else, although it could mean that in some cases. But it could also mean, how do you make really small changes in your day to day, in your role, that bring you back to some of those things that make you feel more in alignment with it? So I want you to take a couple minutes to do that. Great. I also want to give you, with each of these, different things that you can use to continue to try on moving forward and taking action with each of these pivot points. So these are things that you can try this next. And you'll see for all of these, as you can see from my background, I am an avid reader. So for each of the pivot points that we are going through today, I'm going to give you a book recommendation should you want to be a reader. I'm going to give you a resource to consider exploring and diving into, and then also something else. So another strategic action or tool that you can use that will help you if you've identified that you are at this pivot point. So for the path change, one of the best books that you can read is Working Identity here. Amazing research book about how professionals can reinvent themselves by not only experimenting with new roles, but also trying on different responsibilities within their current roles. And I think this is so powerful. I love when I get to talk to people all within one industry because it's such a great opportunity to use your collective knowledge to not pivot out of the industry, but find other ways to really try on and experiment within your industry. So I love this book. It's such a wonderful, practical way to learn some of those things. From a resource perspective, one thing that is really fun is actually taking some adjacent skills to yours and actually trying it on a little bit more through a course that's super easy and accessible. So I love doing things that are light lift, not something that you have to go and invest a whole bunch of time or resources into, but really a micro credential, as I call them. And so you can find those on sites like Coursera. You also can find it on LinkedIn Learning if your organization has access to that. But there's lots of opportunities to really explore some of those adjacent skills. So if you're a designer, you might really want to work on, you're great on the visual side, but maybe you really want to improve your writing skills. There's a lot of really great little micro credentialed courses that you can really play into that and build your writing capability in that way. So love that little resource. Other things that you can do is, I love doing a traffic light audit. So I gave you the details of this here. And so this is all about listing parts of your current work that are green, so those things that are super energizing to you, listing those things that are yellow, so worth experimenting with and playing with and trying in new ways. And then what are those things within your role that are red? So really those key things that you're ready to release. And what you can do with that is you actually look at all the yellows that you have as part of the traffic light activity and say, what yellows can I act on this month? And if like multiples is too much, how do you act and experiment with just one to try something different? So I love a little traffic light audit activity to do. So that is the pivot path for the path change. Next, let's talk about further education. So you are all here, you are all participating in this, so you already know what further education is, but this is all about investing in your skill sets. There is never a better time than right now in the given moment to actually improve and upskill and learn new things that you can add to your tool belt and your toolkit for your professional journey, which, by the way, impacts us personally as well, right? And so my favorite example of this is, of course, the one that only Elle Woods from the iconic movie. We're really going down the nostalgia path today, but a Legally Blonde. And so Legally Blonde is a very campy movie if you're not familiar with it, although I think many of you are likely familiar with it. But it is all about a gal who is in college and very much into her sorority life and really has this whole idea that her whole life revolves around her relationship. Soon, though, when her relationship ends up coming to a crumble, one said relationship takes her boyfriend over to Harvard to go to law school. She then decides that she would like to go to Harvard and go to law school as well. And she being the iconic Elle Woods that we see here. What I think is so interesting about this story that we don't talk about a lot is that initially, yes, she does go to law school to win her ex back. But the coolest part of this story is that through this experience, she actually discovers her own potential. She overcomes doubts, judgment, and imposter syndrome to succeed. And it's all about the education, meaning the skills that she learns, investing really in her, learning new things and growing in new ways, which is just such a powerful part of the story. I mean, we all love it for the feel good side of it, but there's so many amazing lessons along the way. And so, for all of you, really thinking about if this is the pivot point that you're at, it's really an example of how education isn't just about the credentialing. It's really about those softer, or I like to call them power skills that it builds within us. So, confidence, self belief, learning how to advocate for ourselves, also learning how to build key critical influence. And so, just such a great story representative of really leaning into that pivot point of furthering our education and really furthering our investment in ourselves. So, your mini journaling prompt for this one is I want you to think about what skill, topics, or learning path has been quietly calling your attention. And I know sometimes I talk to professionals and they're like, oh, I'm so busy every day doing everything that I need to do. I don't even know what it would be that I would want to invest in upskilling in or invest learning in. And I say, okay, that's fine if you're, thinking about it on the big level, but go a little quieter. What are those little things that made your heart pitter patter? What were those, like something that somebody said that sparked your curiosity? How do you really, well, take a look at that and think about, well, what has been holding you back from exploring that more? Or talking to somebody that does that type of work, who could give you more insight into that area or to that topic. Again, you have so many great fellow industry professionals here that you can lean on and ask questions to and learn from as well. So take a couple minutes for this journaling prompt. All right. What can you try on next when it comes to furthering your education? So, again, book recommendation for you. Designing Your Life is amazing. It is all about using design thinking, but instead of applying it to an actual project or task, it's taking it and applying it to yourself in your career. So, just a really cool way to look at design thinking like that. From a resource perspective, you already know what I'm going to say. It's continue to enroll in your education when you can. But I would also add just really having those conversations with people that are doing the type of things or know about the type of things that have been quietly calling your interest. And then here, my little something else is something I like to call a learning sprint. Agile methodology has been something that is so huge, typically done in 2-week sprints. I feel like we are too busy to really like do learning sprints within 2 weeks. So I think we can extend it to 4 to 6 weeks. And it's all about choosing one topic that you want to go deeper on and learn about. And you focus on that for 4 to 6 weeks. And so you're blocking a couple 30-minute sessions to do some research, to dig in, to really lean into that topic of interest of yours, and then actually sharing what you're learning with a peer or mentor or cross-functional partner that really helps you keep that accountability. So I've seen this be super successful. I've also seen organizations actually set this up as lunch and learns as well. So could be something you try on with your team, your department, or your organization yourself. So, our next pivot point is all about reprioritizing life. And I feel like when the change is so wild and crazy and chaotic, like it is right now, we really start to think about what matters most to us and where do we want to spend our time. And so, I love reprioritizing life because it helps us ask those deeper questions. And one of my favorite, more recent examples of this is Evelyn Wang in Everything Everywhere All at Once. This is such a wild and quirky and mystical, magical movie. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's so interesting. I actually personally did not think it was going to be something that I would like, but it is really interesting. And it is all about Evelyn's story of reevaluating her priorities and redefining what success looks like on her terms, especially given the season of life that she's in. So we find her super overwhelmed running her family's laundromat business while also juggling all the family expectations that she has. And so she, like many busy professionals, is initially focused on work. She is heads down, always working, getting the job done, the person that everyone can depend on. But in in the midst of all that, she realizes that she's completely lost her balance. So she hasn't been focusing on her relationships. She's lost a lot of those really special moments with her family. And so the whole movie is about her grappling with how does she reprioritize and focus on what truly matters, which ends up being connection, love and joy, and really being present. And so this is such a great mirror to hold up to ourselves, especially when we're going through so much newness and change, to say, does there need to be a reprioritization of what I'm focused on right now? And how do I build a little bit more of that integrated balance back into my everyday work life as well? And so your mini journaling prompt for this one is, what would it look like to redefine success in this current season of your life, not the one you imagined 5 years ago? This is a powerful question because we love to do things the way they've always been done. So if we have been on the routine and pattern of doing it a certain way and showing up professionally a certain way, that all of a sudden we can realize that we've been on the hamster wheel going through the motions and we haven't even reconsidered how it could be a little bit different for us. Can we instill more boundaries? Can there be certain areas where we don't give up all those personal moments for the professional ones? How do we create more of that integration? So I love this journaling prompt for you. All right, great. What can you try next? What are some of those resources? So, from a book perspective, I love Radical Candor by Kim Scott. She is one of my personal heroes. She offers you a practical guide for communicating boundaries, priorities, giving really strong feedback in a way that still shows care and compassion. Highly recommend to every professional. From a resource perspective, I love to use the Eisenhower matrix. So really looking at those urgent versus important tasks so that you're spending your time where it really matters the most. I think being clear on where our time is most valued is going to become even more critical as we use AI and we leverage all the different things it can do for us. Our power as humans is still going to be able to prioritize and focus on the things that matter and be able to identify those things. So I love the Eisenhower matrix for this. And then something else, something I would challenge you with is, how can you find a non-negotiable hour every single week? And so you use that hour really focused on your personal renewal. So are you going to go for a walk? Is that time for you to do some reflection? Is that like your inspiration time where you seek out those things that inspire you that you're going to bring back to your work? I know we don't have a million hours in a given week to do this, but I do believe we can challenge ourselves to find that 1 hour per week to do so. All right, we're on our last pivot point that I wanted to talk about today. And this is all about betting on yourself. I love this one so much because it's having that courage and that confidence within you to really make a bold move. And a bold move could be so many different things. It could be starting a side hustle. It could be playing more into your creativity. It also could mean you're bringing new ideas and new information and new processes and new ways of doing things to your current role, to your current organization, into your industry. And so bold moves are really just going up against the status quo and saying that things are going to be different, and you're the one to help guide those things being different. One of my favorite nostalgic ways and examples of looking at this is Little Women. Little Women comes from a book that I continue to read every year. I love to use it as an example here, but it's also been made into countless different movies over the years, many iterations of it. And so the perfect example of betting on yourself is Jo March. So Jo in the story is really rejecting those traditional expectations put on her as a woman. And instead, she decides to follow her passion for writing. And so she's like, no, I know I don't see a lot of women writers, but I still want to do this and I want to go down that path. And even though she faces extreme hardships and challenges and rejection, she still goes down that path. She still pushes her ideas. She feels called to that bigger purpose or that bigger action, and she goes out and she does it. And I think that's a wonderful motivator and inspiration for all of us as well. I know there are so many brilliant minds in this room, so many brilliant creative ideas that you're keeping close to the vest. And so I'd love for you to think about this pivot point as your opportunity to bring those ideas forward, to not keep them so close to the vest, and to actually go out and make a move on them. Bring them to your leader, bring them to your department, your team, your organization in the industry, because we need more of that creativity and more of those bold moves. And so, your mini journaling prompt for this one is, where in your work or even in your life are you waiting for someone else to give you permission when deep down you already know it's your time to begin? So, take a couple minutes to think about that. All right, last one, best one. What should you try next when it comes to betting on yourself if you are at this pivot point? Creative Confidence is a wonderful book. It's actually written by the founders of IDEO, a really, really cool creative agency. It's all about how you rediscover your own unique creativity, how you make some of those super smart risks, and how you bring bold ideas to life within your existing work. And they share examples how they did this themselves. So it's just really interesting. From a resource perspective, I highly encourage you to dig into design thinking. I think that that is something that can be applied to pretty much every single role, especially in the industry that you're in. It is such a great way to tap into that innovation and to also find out how to execute on creative experimentation. And I know that that's something that leaders, regardless of the industry, they want to see more of. And so it's a great way for you to tangibly learn how to do that. As far as something else you can try, I think running micro experiments in your day to day is really powerful. So, identifying some of those ideas that you've been curious about, maybe it's a process improvement change, maybe it's a new tool, maybe it's a fresh client approach, any of those things, and then finding ways to test it and try it on for 30 days, and then learn and share those learnings with other people who are also experimenting and trying new things as well. So, little micro experiments are very, very powerful. My last little piece here that I want to make sure that we talk about before we get into some of the Q&A is that many times all of these things feel like we're in the eye of the hurricane. We talked about VUCA in the beginning. We talked about the pace of change. We know we're overwhelmed. We're stressed. Not only are we reevaluating how we do work and how we create impact, but we're also reevaluating for ourselves. But what I also want to remind us and remind all of you that are like sitting here today is that when we are in the middle of all of this change ourselves, it's really easy to forget that everyone, really all of us here, we're also all navigating this change and this chaos and this change as well. And so every single person that you work with, whether it's your peers, your clients, your team, everybody here within your industry, we're all facing our own version of uncertainty. And so that's really validating because we're not in it alone. And so community amidst these changes and amidst all these different career changes or leaps or ideas that we're having and grappling with is that community matters so immensely. And so to navigate all of this change and navigating these pivot points, we can make it a lot easier on ourselves when we remember that we have a community of support. We have shared experiences where we can hear from others who have been there or have navigated similar things as us. We can get that validation knowing that our feelings and struggles are absolutely normal. We can also receive advice and guidance of how we move forward based on all the different diverse perspectives and approaches that are available to us. What I also love is it's such a wealth of encouragement too. And so again, I know I said this before, but the people here in this room, these are people that you can lean on and turn to who are also facing very similar experiences as you. So we cannot forget that. They're also great accountability as well. And so when we share our experience and we learn from others, we get that clarity of what's really possible. We find those new approaches that we hadn't considered before, and we build confidence simply by hearing how others succeeded and were able to work through it as well. And so, to create momentum and to work through these pivot points and to overcome this change, it's all about having those practical ideas and real life shared stories that we can go back to. And so for today, I know we went through so many things, but I want you to remember that pivot points are super powerful opportunities to realign and grow even in the midst of change. Community and the people around you have that shared vision and wisdom that are completely invaluable. So please make sure that you're leaning on that so that you can navigate these moments with more care and compassion, knowing that there are people with that same experience around you. And really, it's our small, actionable steps that actually build that momentum. We do not have to jolt ourselves and propel ourselves forward in the biggest of actions. It's really those tiny micro actions that make a difference. And so the last thing I wanted to share with you is one of my favorite Teddy Roosevelt quotes, and it's all about being the man in the arena. Because a lot of times we're like, oh my gosh, I am here. I am, doing all the things. I am working my way through it, and it feels really tough. And then I see some other people out there, and it doesn't feel like they're going through all the hard things that I'm going through. And is it just me? Am I feeling crazy? And so I always love to come back to the man in the arena. And it's all about we can't look at what those other people that are making it look easy are saying. We have to remember that we are in it. We are doing the work. And the people who are also in it and doing the work, AKA everyone here, they're the ones that you can lean on. They are the ones that create those shared experiences for you. And so I literally have this on my desktop. I wanted to share it with you all today. I think it is such a powerful reminder that there are people around you here that are also doing the work, and they're the ones that you want to lean on as well. And so the last thing I'll leave you with today is I want you to think of one simple action you'll take this week to lead yourself, your team, or even the work that you're doing through change. Maybe it's identifying your pivot point. Maybe it's helping other people on your team identify theirs. Maybe it's taking one of those book recommendations and starting to dig into it. Whatever it is, I just want you to do pick one thing and then share it in the chat before we leave today. So, with that, it's my final reminder. Leading through change isn't about having all the answers, it's about continuing to show up in the arena. And that's all I have for you. So, I think we're going to open it up to some Q&A.
Thank you to Brittany for helping us better understand how to navigate career transitions and lead effectively through change. We have a few questions from the audience, so let's jump right into the Q&A. Brittany, an attendee mentioned that it is difficult for them to make up their mind on what they actually want to do for their career. Could you share a helpful trick to help us learn more and determine what we actually want to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love this question so much because I feel like so many of us at one point or another grapple with this type of thing. What do I really want to do? How do I feel about it? So I always recommend to find someone or multiple people that are doing some way, shape, or form of that thing that you think that you want to try or do and have a conversation with them. Because the moment you have a conversation with them and you really think about like, how am I feeling during this conversation? Like, as they're telling me about their day in and day out of doing this thing that I think I might be interested in, you are immediately going to tell within yourself, like, ooh, that sounds really good. And that's really energizing to me. And I actually do want to take action on this. Or conversely, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, that doesn't sound like anything I want to do at all. That sounds terrible. Like, I now understand and have some clarity that I don't want to do that at all. So, my best tip for that is get in front of people that are doing that thing that you want to do so that you can get the chance to see how you really feel about it and see what it really looks like in real world application, which changes everything.
Thank you, Brittany. Moving on to our next question. You mentioned several signals that indicate a potential pivot point, such as a renewed strategic focus or recognizing that certain roles or priorities no longer align with the organization's strengths or values. How can leadership proactively prepare for these moments of transition?
Yeah, well, and this is such a good question too, because I will say a lot of the things that we talked about here are things that are within your control as an individual, whether you're a business owner, whether you're an individual contributor at a company, or whether you're a leader but still an individual at an organization. But the other side of that street is that our organization, they still hold half of that street. They're half of the street of that responsibility. So this question is so excellent with that. And I think what's very critical is that these pivot points, they're no surprise. Like every time I talk about these with individuals or with organizations, they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, our people are saying these things. We know this, we're nodding along. And so I think it's about organizations really using the data that they have. They know that their people have these signals, they know that people are going through this, and really developing resources and conversations around these pivot pivot points to create that proactive nature. Now, I feel very lucky because a lot of the amazing organizations I get to work with, I do this work with them, but it does require an organization or a company or an association to want to do that work. And I think that's a critical piece of that, which opens up a whole other can of worms conversation there. But I think that's a short way to answer it at this point now. Um, and whoever asked that question can certainly reach out to me for more larger context and info.
Wonderful. Thank you for that insight. Moving on to our next question. How can individuals distinguish between a healthy career pivot that signals growth and a one that might be driven by burnout or external pressures?
Ooh, gosh, these questions are so good. They're making me so excited. You all are my people. Like I said, this is a homecoming. And so I always say, are you being pushed towards something or are you being pulled towards something? And that's a really big difference. When you are being pulled towards something and a healthy pivot, you're really excited, you're energized, you know you want more, you know you want different, you have that little bit of clarity there. When you are being pushed away from something and you're choosing to make a pivot because you're maybe in a really negative space. Maybe it's a really, really toxic environment. I still think the pivot is good, but when you're being pushed that way, you have to do a little bit more work, a little bit more of that reflection to make sure that you're not making the pivot too soon. I see that happen all the time. It's like we want to jump ship the moment that something feels uncomfortable or something isn't perfect or it's not exactly in the way that we want it to be. And even though I'm a very positive person, I'm also a realist. And the truth is, not everything is going to be perfect all the time. That is impossible. There has to be a layer of uncomfiness no matter what. Again, not any type of harassment situation. That is an absolute no no. Really important that I say that piece. And so I think that that is really, really critical that when you feel like you're being pushed out of something that you're in currently, do a little bit more reflection, be really intentional about the action so that you're not jumping too soon.
Thank you. Moving on to our last question of the day. You kind of already touched on how leadership can proactively prepare for those moments, but from your perspective, what distinguishes leaders in the design and build field who successfully evolve with their businesses and teams during this time?
Ooh, and my favorite way to say that is the biggest differentiator or distinguisher is giving a damn. Hopefully, I could say that on here. I think the biggest differentiator, again, is giving a damn about the people around you, having genuine care, really asking people how they are, really digging in with curiosity versus assumptions. That I know it sounds so simple. It's probably not the payoff answer that whoever asked that was looking for, but I will tell you, it's the biggest game changer in making people feel seen, heard, and valued. So, leaders that actually genuinely give a damn make all the difference. And that doesn't mean that you have to be best friends with anybody, but it does mean that you have to have some level of care. And so I'd love to get on my soapbox about that. I won't do it completely here, but yeah, giving a damn is so important.
Brittany, before we end today, do you have any final thoughts for our audience?
I would just say, so I loved one of the comments that I saw in the chat about these are such great reflections. I would encourage all of you. I know that we feel busier than ever. We feel like when do we ever have the time to focus on ourselves? But really, one of the best things that we can truly do is carve out that time for reflection. It really allows us to make space where no space and time exists and to really be a little bit more strategic, thoughtful, and intentional about whatever we're doing, whether it's something that's truly work related or whether it's that personal development for ourselves. So that's what I'd leave you all with. But thank you so much. I appreciate you and I hope we all stay in touch.
We want to thank Brittany for sharing her expertise with us, Dervit for generously sponsoring November's webinar series, and a huge thank you to our wonderful audience for attending today's session. Wishing everyone a wonderful Tuesday, and we look forward to having you join us for tomorrow's webinar at the same time, 12 p.m. ET. See you, everyone.
Bye.